Well, thank you, and thank you to everyone who's joining us both here in person and remotely on the web today. It's fitting that we're here in Cumberland County for a couple of reasons. We are here in the Trinity AME Church in Gouldstown, and there's two reasons why this is important. The first is because we're here in the church of Pastor Keene, who, in addition to being a member of the clergy, is also a mental health professional. So this is someone who understands the close relationship between the church and also providing folks with other forms of counseling services. But the other reason why it's significant that we're here in Cumberland County is because today we're announcing a new program designed to help strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and the community they serve, and also to address the relationship between mental health and policing in our state. We are excited to announce that we're launching a pilot program that we're calling Arrive Together, which pairs a plainclothes state trooper with a licensed mental health clinician to respond jointly to folks in mental health crisis. And before we get into today's panel discussion about mental health and policing more broadly, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about how we got to the announcement that we're making today. So, as I think a lot of folks know, last year the AG's office began collecting statewide data about when law enforcement officers use force against civilians. We now collect that data from all 38,000 cops across the state. That information is submitted to our office within 24 hours of an incident. And as that data started coming in, we began analyzing it and trying to understand what are the trends so we can figure out how do we reduce the use of force. And one of the things that we noticed, and it's just absolutely remarkable, is that 2 out of every 3 use of force incidents in New Jersey involve someone who is either experiencing a mental health crisis or is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. That is shocking. But the reality is it's also not surprising, because increasingly we have asked law enforcement officers to do a whole bunch of things that they never expected to have to do. We ask law enforcement officers to be marriage counselors and to be therapists and to be crisis interveners. And we ask them to do a bunch of things, sometimes for which we give them the training and sometimes we don't. Increasingly, we are finding that we're asking officers to be doctors and psychiatrists to figure out what kinds of drugs someone might have been taking or to figure out what kind of mental health issues they're experiencing. And so we wanted to address that by sending out a licensed clinician along with the state trooper. So normally what happens is that if someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, they call 911, and then the dispatcher will send out whatever officer happens to be closest by. Sometimes they have training, and sometimes they don't. What we're doing with Arrive Together is that when we get a call through 911 about someone in a mental health crisis, we're sending out 2 people, a state trooper who is trained to deal with mental health issues, and also a licensed mental health screener. The idea is that the state trooper will arrive and help ensure that the area is secure, that there's no risks to anyone's bodily safety. But then once the scene is secure, they'll send in the mental health clinician who will take the lead in the response. The idea is that this reduces the likelihood that it escalates into violence, and it increases the likelihood that the individual in crisis is able to get the help they need. We're trying it as a pilot program here in Cumberland County. We're going to be evaluating it in partnership with the Rutgers School of Public Health. And if it works, we'll look to expand it statewide, because we really think that this is an important step that we can take to make it safer for officers and make it safer for civilians and reduce the use of force, which is something that everyone wants, whether you're in law enforcement or you're a member of the broader community. So that's what we're announcing today, but we also wanted to use that as a jumping off point for talking more broadly about mental health and policing. And so I have 4 of the state's experts on this sitting here with me. I've got Bryn Whittle, who's the Director of Community Engagement and Senior Counsel to the Acting Attorney General, who has spent a number of years in law enforcement in the AG's office, who has been one of the leaders in helping to work with the community as we launch this program here in Cumberland. I have Jennifer Webb-McCrae, the Cumberland County Prosecutor. We have Reverend Boyer from Salvation and Social Justice, and we have Colonel Pat Callahan, the Superintendent of State Police. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Bryn Whittle, who will serve as the moderator of today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Acting Attorney General Brooke. I appreciate your kind introduction, as well as the opportunity to moderate this panel discussion. It is an issue that is very important, very alarming and concerning. And I am so proud that our office is stepping out to do such a great initiative. So with that being said, I'd like to just jump in and start this discussion. So we'll start with you. There are different responder models to address mental health crises. Why did you select the co-responder model? What makes this pilot different than other programs across the state?
Sure. So there's a couple different models that you can use when responding to someone in mental health crisis, and it's going to depend on sort of the level of risk that the person presents. There might be occasions where you're able to send someone out who's not a law enforcement officer to deal with someone who's in a mental health crisis. But if you're going to be doing that and not send out a law enforcement officer, you want to do it in a situation where you know that it's safe and where there's a very low likelihood that the person is actually going to be injured. There are other situations where you might send out just a law enforcement officer, ideally an officer who's been trained in CIT training or other sorts of mental health training, and they know how to respond. But we thought that the co-response model was an important one to try because it hasn't really been done on this scale here in New Jersey. We know that there's a number of other law enforcement agencies that have been looking at models like this, but it's never been done like this here in New Jersey. It has been done successfully out on the West Coast, so you see this in Eugene, Oregon, and places in Washington State. But we wanted to show that New Jersey is so widely seen as a national leader on policing policy that this would be a natural thing for us to take the lead on.
Yes, we've been quite busy in this arena, so. But good things. And why was Cumberland County selected for the pilot?
So a couple of reasons. One is we have a wonderful relationship with the county prosecutor here in Cumberland County. We really enjoy working with Prosecutor Webb McCrae. But also, one of the things that's unique about Cumberland County is that most of the law enforcement services in this county are provided by the New Jersey State Police. So this is not something that will be familiar to folks who live in North Jersey, where there's a municipal police department in every town. But actually down here in Cumberland County, most of the municipalities do not have their own police departments, and instead general policing services are provided by state police. So when we wanted to set a program like this up, we wanted to do it in a place where we would be able to sort of have a fair degree of control over the program, make sure that it operates well, and to be able to get this set up quickly. And there was really no better partner for that than New Jersey State Police. It has been incredible what a great partner they have been in this. I remember having a conversation with the colonel and other folks in state police leadership about this. And as soon as we said this was something that we were interested in exploring, they said, let's do it, let's make it work. And it is incredible to see state police mobilize when they really are committed to something. We also have great relationships with the state police unions, and we've been able to talk through with them so that we can give folks assurance that in doing this, we're also making sure that we protect officer safety and that we can sort of reaffirm state police's role as a national leader and as a state leader on policing issues in our state.
Wonderful. So are there plans to expand?
So we want to see how this works here in Cumberland County. We are cautiously optimistic this is going to be successful if it works similar to how it has been in other states. One of the things that is great is that the mental health screeners that we're going to be using as part of this program are funded by the Department of Human Services here in New Jersey, and they fund mental health screeners in other counties as well. So if this does work here in Cumberland County, there is the opportunity to try to scale it up, but we want to make sure that we do it in a thoughtful, considered way, and that we iron out all the issues here in Cumberland where we have really good partners to make it work.
Thank you so much. And now I want to turn to Colonel Callahan, our esteemed leader of our state police. And so can you describe how the pilot is going to work?
I can. We are going to have, again, this pilot, we're going to start on December 2nd, was the very first one. We're not going to be taking away from the staffing on the squads at both Bridgeton and Port Norris. To follow up on the general's point, Bridgeton covers 7 municipalities in Cumberland, Port Norris covers 5. So for a total of 12, we will have a plainclothes trooper in an unmarked car paired with that mental health screener. Piece of this is also the important part is that incoming call that the dispatcher or our public safety telecommunicators are trained in what questions to ask, and then the trooper and the mental health screener together decide if that's an appropriate call to respond to. And I do think I do think we're going to see successes from this as we roll this out a few days in December, and then as we get into 2022, we'll start to see it expand.
Yes, and I think it'll go a long way to building community trust as well. So
That's right.
we're looking forward to it. And what will the response to a call consist of?
Most likely, to the general's earlier point, a uniformed trooper may be the first one to respond to make sure that that scene is secured. If not, that trooper, which I'd like to point out too, the troopers are excited about this. Anybody who's involved in this pilot has volunteered to do it, which I think speaks volumes to their dedication to service and that attempt to divert individuals away from the criminal justice system and towards medical and mental health, which is another key benefit to this pilot, which I trust we'll see. And then again, that's what they're going to focus on that 8-hour shift. We did a dive into the data. We noticed when most of those calls are, where they are. And I think using that data-driven, intelligence-led approach, they will not respond to motor vehicle accidents. They will not respond to critical incidents. If there's a critical situation where that plainclothes trooper needs to respond, he or she will drop off that mental health screener at a safe location and then respond. But we want to make sure that their primary and really only focus is on getting to that person who's struggling in crisis.
Wonderful. You hit on some really important notes for our viewers, that this is data driven, that we're moving toward more so to divert from the criminal justice system, and that we do want to preserve officer safety as well as the mental health screener on the scene. So thank you, Colonel.
Thank you.
And you kind of hit on the next question. So how do you ensure the safety of both the troopers and mental health screeners? Did you want to add anything to that?
How are they going to operate, Bryn?
Ensure their safety.
Yeah, well, I think that's the piece of this, is they're not the only part of this team and this team approach. I think having, again, human services, the prosecutor's office, the Cumberland County Guidance Center, all of these members coming together to take that best approach. And we're across the nation, you see people, to the general's point, call 911 when they're in crisis. Mm-hmm. We don't want the counselor or mental health screener's safety jeopardized, or the troopers. So that key aspect is making sure that scene is secured. And then that de-escalation standpoint, sometimes showing up in this gets people a little spun up. And I think we need to change that perception by having a plainclothes trooper show up and bring that temperature down. And then we decide, where do they go? Do they need to go to a hospital? Are they okay? And then the real key piece is the follow-up, to be out there in the weeks to come, making sure that we stop back in and check in on those folks.
Right, and while we do often, talk about the uniform and the suit and how regal it is, you hit on a very valid point about showing up in plain clothes, and that really goes toward building, community trust. And so we thank you for being so open to that, Colonel.
Thank you.
All right. So I have Prosecutor McCray here, and just want to focus on the fact that you are the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for your county. And so how do you think a program like this can help Cumberland County's community?
Well, we were ecstatic when we learned that we were going to be the pilot county, and it is appropriate when 12 of your 15 municipalities are covered by the state police. One, because it covers a wide swath geographically of the county, but also of the professionalism that the state police demonstrate each and every day. So we thank the general as well as the colonel for that. We were ecstatic because it's another piece in our plan to reimagine what public safety can look like throughout Cumberland County and throughout the state. We've been very successful in meeting people's needs when they're under the influence of drugs and alcohol and getting treatment on demand. And this will just be another complement to making sure that when people are in crisis, that we can get crisis help on demand as well. My goal is to create mechanisms where law enforcement officers can be law enforcement officers addressing danger and public safety, and also pushing some of the ills that we have to grapple with and deal with back up the pipeline to the professionals that can best handle them. And this co-responder model is fabulous for that because number one, we can assess whether the situation is actually a dangerous situation, and once we've made sure and stabilized that, deal with the person's crisis. I had the privilege and opportunity to chair when the prior Attorney General was doing the use of force committee, the committee that was named addressing emotionally disturbed persons. And the first thing we learned from the mental health professionals were to not call them emotionally disturbed persons. They are people in crisis, and it is a medical crisis. So that was the first thing that we recommended. But we also learned that at least the scholastic periodicals say that 25% of the officer-involved fatal shootings are actually cause for mental health crisis. So creating models like this that address, number one, the person's issues, but also stabilize the danger in those situations is going to be a win-win for Cumberland County, but also a win for our state.
So we appreciate your enthusiasm as well as your forward-thinking leadership. I've had the pleasure of working with you over the years, and just the things that you've been able to do have been very impressive. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I think you hit on a very good note about culture change. Sometimes, our language and how we present things. So thank you for that. So noting that the pilot covers the towns that are served by state police, do you have plans to address similar incidents in Bridgeton, Millville, and Vineland, which all have their own police departments?
We absolutely do. Prayerfully, since we're sitting in a house of God, we have gone after a couple grants where, if successful, and we have become successful in getting awarded grants, we will be able to bring a similar program that will be countywide. One, we will be able to embed a social worker into the city of Millville for a pilot program in collaboration with Inspira Health Hospital, and also have workers who respond with police officers in the 3 major municipalities with police departments, so that that young officer who in the middle of the night has to address a call with a person in crisis can within minutes have a crisis professional available for them and for the person in crisis as well. So that's one thing that we're doing. We're also gearing up, and it's been a little difficult with COVID, to provide countywide crisis intervention training on a routine basis beginning in 2022. And with our Attorney General County Mental Health Working Group, we've been asset mapping the existing resources in our community to address mental health crisis and long-term mental health treatment with all of our professionals. Because even though many people are working hard throughout the community to address mental health, we oftentimes work in silos. So it's necessary to remind often our police officers, but also our other stakeholders in the system, our school professionals, our social service professionals, where they can refer people to when people are experiencing mental health crisis, but also up the pipeline when they are experiencing trauma. And then finally, we are in the process of reviewing diversionary models nationwide so that we can, when people come into our criminal justice system charged with a crime, be able to divert them to robust programs and then dismiss their charges.
Wonderful. Again, didn't I say she was forward thinking? So
Thank you.
and definitely a leader in this area. So we appreciate you for that. Dr. Boyer, thank you so much for joining us today. And we know that you are active in this space as well, you and your organization. So can you discuss Salvation and Social Justice's work in this space? Your organization has launched a community responder model. And can you just explain how that model works and your project status?
Sure. First, let me, I'm AME, so and I'm in the AME church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. we're big on protocol. So the general did establish protocol, but I still have to say thank you all for having this discussion here in Trinity AME Church in Goulstown, a historic church, a historic town. Goulstown has significant Black history. This church has significant Black history. And for that, this community conversation, this goes to show how great a prosecutor is. She knows the history. To have this kind of conversation about community trust, a lot of stuff that directly impacts Black community in a church that's pastored by a mental health professional, goes to show the level of sophistication and good-hearted intention of the folks that are at this table. So I just want to say I've worked with every single one of these folks for quite some time. And if there was ever a group of people who really wanted to do the human thing, it's the folks sitting at this table. And that makes this work as difficult as it is a pleasure. Our work, Salvation and Social Justice, just to be clear, we're exploring models right now. Our work is really about hearing from communities at this stage, hearing from communities what they want, and knowing that different communities have different perspectives. So our work thus far, we've been in the city of Elizabeth, and we've been in Gloucester County, where I pastored prior to coming to Trenton. And we gathered folks, young people, folks directly impacted by use of force and substance use professionals, mental health professionals, and then just began to ask the question, how would you have rather been treated rather than having a law enforcement response to your health issue? That's the question. And then people begin to open up and have some very interesting perspectives there. So from that, we have documented really much of what is like being discussed here today. The people would have rather a health response to their health crisis is really what it comes down to. There's several models which are emerging, some that are more like the Cahoots program out west, others that are co-responder models, very similar. The Elizabeth model is very similar to the model we're talking about here. The Gloucester County model is probably more similar to the Cahoots model at this point. Where the work is evolving to in the next phase of the work in 22, we'll be coming into Trenton to have those same kind of discussions. And our work ultimately will be to advocate for resources to expand programs like these as determined by those communities, whether they be community-led first response or co-responder models. The major distinction between the piece that we're working on and this model, and this is why they complement each other so well, is that our work has focused on explicitly non-violent behavioral health, mental health, substance use issues. And I'll give you the perfect example. And, y'all gotta excuse me because I'm a Black preacher in a Black church. So. But
I put my mask back.
You knew it was gonna be a while. So I'll give you this one example. Where I pastor now, I've been pastoring in Trenton since June. And Rosalie and I, my wife, we're originally from the cities. We ministry work in Patterson and Newark prior. There you go. So we're back in the city. My office, the church building is here, and my office has a window which faces the church building in a separate building. A young man comes and goes in the stairwell about once a week. And he's going into that stairwell and he's injecting What I didn't want to do was call the police. He's dealing with a health issue. And if you know anything about Trenton, the police have much better things to do with all of the shootings. We're amongst some of the highest homicides, gun violence in the nation right now. They have better things to do, and there's a better response. We've been talking to the health department. We had a discussion with the health department. What kind of resources are available for this young man? And that's the kind of model that we're looking at. He's obviously not violent. He's never broken into anything, but I see him day after day. Who would better serve this situation is the question that we're trying to answer in the models that we're looking at.
Wonderful. And you can always count on you for a good word. So thank you, and thank you for bringing up the history right here that we have, and our team thought it was very important to be in Cumberland County to make the announcement. We're so accustomed to having, sessions where we open up to the public and have people in and ask questions, and COVID has really impacted, how we do things, but we still want to, show the community that we are there, we're present, and we're going to continue to do this great work. So looking ahead, what are some of your planned next steps?
Yeah, so the next steps in our model, and I encourage everybody to go to callnj.org, which has the deep dive pieces on our model, the work that's been done so far. The next phase in our work is to, one, do that same work that we've done in Gloucester County and in Elizabeth, to do that work right there in Trenton. And to look at these, and then, so that's one, is to open up a new space and have those discussions. Two is to move towards implementation of the community Imagine response models from Gloucester and Elizabeth, to go through a implementation process, right? And then determine how it's going to get funded. We're talking to, like in Gloucester County with Ascenda, in Elizabeth, talking to Trinitas, right? Talking to the healthcare providers in those areas about how these partnerships and how these pieces can look. The general and I have had hours of discussions about this, and we're both on the same page. It's going to take years to understand how we best do humanity in this. And what I'm excited about with all these different pieces is that we're looking at what works, what doesn't work, how do we pivot, how do we move, how do we work together. And although our model has a very specific focus, it is not meant to be done in a sandbox or a vacuum. That's why we're here together, so we can talk, share, collaborate. And so all of the pieces in regards to next steps are all done collaboratively, and ultimately looking to expand and learn from each other.
Wonderful.
And I just want to elaborate on that. And I'm so happy that Reverend Boyer is a partner, because we do a lot of pilots and we look to see what the successes are of the pilots and how we can tweak things to make them better. And there's a famous author, and I can't quote his name right now, I believe it's Samuel Beckett, who said, we try, we fail, and then we try again better. And why you are such a good partner in this is that as we reimagine public safety, it's super, super important to hold systems accountable, to reallocate resources to where people are better served. And when I talk to law enforcement officers about what they want to be doing and what they've trained to do, we want them to be out there fighting crime. And, they don't want to be responding to things that they're ill-equipped to deal with. And that's not defunding the police. It's really reallocating resources in a way where they're better spent, because we know intervention and prevention is so much cheaper and more cost-effective than responding to things with the criminal justice solution. So I thank you, Reverend Boyer, for the work that you do. And I also thank you for holding people like me and the Attorney General and the governor's feet to the fire to serve and meet people's needs.
You brought up a wonderful point. Accountability is very important in this work. While we like to collaborate, we all like to be on the same page. It's important to keep us accountable as well. Colonel Callahan, just want to acknowledge that this is the centennial year for state police. And what do you see on the horizon for the next 100 years?
Well, I'm just thrilled that we have a generation of women and men that are willing to step up and raise their right hand and take an oath to put others before them. And I see that certainly in this class that's going to graduate in a few weeks, a few days before Christmas, 151 women and men that are ready to start our 101st year of service. And I'll just echo what the Reverend said about doing the human thing. Since I've been in this position, there's an effort underway from a community engagement and trust standpoint that I refer to as humanizing the badge. That we don't want people to see this and have fear instilled in them. We want them to see this uniform and has a sense of calm and somebody who's going to bring order to chaos and resolve their conflict. And so I trust that this program is a piece of that the community sees us as Little League coaches, as Sunday school teachers, as mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters. Because to the Rev's point and the General's point, people expect a lot from law enforcement. They expect them to be all those things in one. And to the extent that we try and train, this is a step towards better outcomes. This is a step toward not only the positive outcomes of not having to use of force, but keeping somebody out of the criminal justice system, teaching troopers how to de-escalate and respond. It's got the prongs of benefits on this, if successful, are going to be phenomenal. So I want to see the colonel who's sitting here 200 years from now look back on this and that change that might take years to come, that a century from now, that law enforcement is serving the public to the best of their ability as they should be. So I'm honored to be a part of it.
You and the AG have planted the seeds, so we'll watch it grow.
Thanks, Brent.
And one of the things that I think is really great about the New Jersey State Police is that it's an organization that really cares about its tradition and its history, and it's such an important part of its culture. But it's not an organization that is bound by its history, that is willing to recognize places where we can improve in the criminal justice system. And there's an openness to trying new things, and it's through that openness that state police has established itself as the premier law enforcement agency in the state.
Yeah, and thank you, General. I go back, so this Friday we will go up to West Point and we will put a wreath on Colonel Schwarzkopf's grave, marking our 100th anniversary. Tomorrow actually marks the day the first class was sworn in, but his very first general order, which I say today is as timeless and as appropriate today, and I remind troopers every day, his general order number 1 said the prevention of crime is more important than the punishment of criminals. That was 100 years ago. And I trust that programs like this, 100 years from now, that general order number 1, to the General's point, we hold tradition and pride and self-discipline. But that willingness to change, you need to be willing to adapt to society, or certainly like the dinosaurs, you will become extinct and no longer relevant. So we're honored to adapt and honored to best serve the citizens of this great state.
Wow, so there's so much wisdom right here on this panel. So I'm just soaking it up and soaking it in. But you hit on something that will take us to our last question. And you talked about humanizing the badge. And so our last question, to kind of wrap up this discussion, will go to our general. Anecdotally, collaborations between law enforcement and community organizations appear to be on the rise in New Jersey. Do you anticipate a growing trend for law enforcement agencies to address mental health through a collaborative process?
So look, I hope everything we do is done through a collaborative process. And I think that it's easy when we all stand in a room together. You look at all the folks who are gathered here, just here in Cumberland County, how we've all come together on a project that we think is good policy for both civilians and officers alike. And on days like this, it seems easy, but it's not. And getting consensus, getting collaboration requires hard work. It requires bringing folks to the table, sitting down, listening, responding, reacting, disagreeing, agreeing, and through that process, building trust. And we all have an interest in having the criminal justice system work the best that it can. We all recognize there are places where it's fallen short, and we all recognize that we can be part of that solution. And so I hope that what we're doing today is a model for what this office can do, what for all of us can do, and for what other law enforcement agencies can do in New Jersey as we push forward a vision of New Jersey as a national leader in these issues.
Wonderful. Told you wisdom. So, with that being said, I just want to thank our esteemed panelists for taking this time this afternoon to join us for the announcement as well as this discussion about mental health and policing, which is a very important issue, not just within the state of New Jersey, but nationally. So I want to thank all the viewers who joined us to listen in and to take in this information. And I definitely want to thank Reverend Keene for being such an amazing host. And we will be doing much more work together, I'm sure of it. And so with that being said, I just want to have some closing remarks to kind of wrap things up. And we're going to start with in reverse order. So we'll start with Dr. Boyer, then we'll come to Prosecutor Webb McCrae, we'll have Colonel Callahan, and our final words will be from our Attorney General, Andrew Brooke. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm a history buff, and something that the general and the colonel said really resonated with me. What I just want to note, again, here I am, AME preacher whose mentor was Reginald T. Jackson, one of my mentors. And this work that he did 20 years ago with the state police and the issue of racial profiling, which led to the use of force, one of the things that led to the use of force documentation, which led to ultimately we come here today and led to one of the strongest directive in regards to use of force in the nation to come out of the AG's office. But I also feel that work, to the prosecutor's point about accountability, leads to who the next generation of leaders are. And the colonel has been a great partner. And I gotta say that because he's been kind, whether we're coming and having coffee or whether we're coming to protest the police. He's been kind. His officers have been professional. I shared a story. One time, one of his officers, I was protesting. This is years ago now. We were out in the middle of the street, and one of his officers said, "Okay, sir, I'm about to handcuff you. Is that too tight?" I just wanted to lift up that even sometimes when the tug of war is there, but where we are today is a testament of where folks before us went. And the last piece I just want to say, because one of the reasons that I'm in this particular space is because of something that Prosecutor Webb McCrae said years ago. And I heard it from other law enforcement. Society fails people at every point in the spectrum. And then when they're in crisis, it's up to law enforcement to be everything to that person in the moment. And that opened up something inside of me, which helped me to see the humanity of how we as a society have put everybody in a bad position. And so I commend this work and commend everybody here as we look to reimagine, redefine, and restructure ourselves to do the human thing.
So I have to say, because I forgot to say it the other time, I'm a UAME kid. I grew up in a UAME church. So, and the way I lead comes from my faith. I believe that every individual is worthy of redemption. And we shouldn't be defined by our worst day. We should be defined by our best day. And when we accept jobs and leadership and things like law enforcement or government, we govern or make decisions with the consent of the people. And that's everybody, not the best people. It's people on their worst day. And we have to treat them with kindness, with integrity, and with compassion. And I see this program as just one more step in treating people with compassion on one of their worst days. And the challenge for all of us will be, once we address that moment, what do we do next, right? And that means that we all have to use our voices to make sure that systems work better to serve people. So I'm super excited to be here. I thank you so much, General, for choosing Cumberland County. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you to all the troopers that will participate. Thank you to all the mental health professionals that will participate. And you can count on myself as well as the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office in being a partner in this work.
Thank you. I'll just echo the remarks. I think another point that I stress, those people that are calling 911 are often marginalized. A lot of times have come into this world with a few strikes against them, whether that's into a domestic violence situation or whether that's into poverty. So when we're called as law enforcement officers to that, and I say this again to as many troopers and officers as I can, the last thing that person has is their dignity. And don't ever try and take it from them, because they will fight you for it, as they should. And to your point, prosecutor, I always stress compassion and according to the Constitution. And if you start with the compassion piece, we're playing the animal.
To the Oscars.
It's like you told me. If you start with the compassion, the constitutionality of that engagement has to follow. It doesn't have an option.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where this paradigm shift and culture shift in law enforcement comes. You can still arrest somebody with a kilo and a gun, or still might have to use force. But at the end of the day, that compassion piece is huge. And I'll end with this, because I used to, and I'll share this openly. I remember driving people that I arrested into the Sally Ports of county jails and lodging them, and that Sally Port door would go, and off I went. And I didn't realize it at the time until my son was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, and went and visited him every weekend. It's a whole different world on the other side of that Sally Port. And I think if people understood that the families didn't do anything wrong, and that we all are family, and that we need to work as one community when we're shoulder to shoulder like this, when I know Reverend Boyer and I know Pastor Taylor, and I'm not getting to know them around yellow crime scene tape. I'm getting to know them in churches. I'm getting to know them at barbecues and on a basketball court and at a turkey drive and a coat drive. That's when you will see the trust really start to rise up. That'll carry us through those moments that are going to come. The civil unrest is going to come. Some issues will arise, but those relationships are what are going to carry us through those moments. And again, I'm honored and humbled to be a part of that process.
Well, there's not much to add beyond what these three have said. I just want to say how incredibly proud I am of so many people for helping to make this possible. Folks in state police, folks in the AG's office, folks in the community who provide feedback and thought and input, folks in the county prosecutor's office. This really is done through collaboration. I love what the Reverend said, that we have to try a bunch of different models. We have to see what works, because this is such a critically important issue. We can't solve this alone. We can only solve it together. And one thing that we're doing today is, in addition to rolling out this program, we're also rolling out these placards that we're going to be giving out to all 38,000 law enforcement officers in New Jersey, which provide just basic information on how to identify folks who are experiencing a behavioral health crisis. So even if you're not in Cumberland County and being able to benefit from the program we're rolling out today. This is a start and a down payment on a program that we hope to eventually take statewide. And to the prosecutor's point, if we're judged not by our worst days, but by our best days, I really hope that we can be judged by days like this. So thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure.